Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Road Trips Navigating Life with Jesus. I'm Tyler Waugh, and today I'm excited to share with you a series of episodes titled The Lies We Tell. As followers of Christ, we're called to place our ultimate identity in God. But it can be hard to do so when we're constantly told that our lives will never be truly fulfilled until we acquire more, do more, or put out the right image to the world. Today's episode is about the lie of I am what I have. Jesus had something to say about this in Matthew 6, starting in verse 19, where he says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." My guest today is Chris McCurley. Chris is the preaching minister at the Walnut Street Church of Christ in Dixon, Tennessee, and is the host of the Dear Church podcast. Today on the show, we discuss why it is we feed ourselves this lie, where we can see this lie in our lives as Christians, and the role social media and discontentment plays in telling us this lie. We conclude our conversation by talking about some practical ways that we can avoid letting our possessions rule our lives. Buckle up, everyone. This is Road Trips. All right, Chris McCurley, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate you having me.
So, you recently preached a sermon on Matthew 6, 19 through 24, about not laying up treasures on earth and how that can go not just for money, but really for all possessions we own. So, I just want to start out by asking this question. Why is it that we tell ourselves this lie of I am what I have?
Yeah, I think the whole issue revolves around identity, and culture will try to define you in various ways. Right now, our society seems to want to identify you by your sex, your gender, your sexual preference, and that's who you are at your core. But that's not the truth. Your identity is not found in what you have or even what your label is. Your identity is found in Christ, and sexually, that's a component of who you are, but it's not all of who you are. And what you may have in your possession, can be very instrumental in shaping you. Not just possessions and money, but I mean, we think about our children, we think about our marriage, we think about our job, our career, those kind of things. All of that can go towards defining you. But I got a chance to talk recently to the football team here in Dixon County, and one of the things that I asked him was, I asked him to stand up and tell me your name and your position, and one of them stood up and said, I'm the quarterback, but I tried to correct that gently to say you're not the quarterback, you play quarterback, right? But we tend to define ourselves by what we do rather than who we are. So I say, well, I'm a preacher. No, I preach. I'm a Christian first. And so getting to the root of the problem is understanding who you are at your core. And who you are at your core is not what you have or how someone else defines you, but rather who you are in Christ. And I think that's where it gets to when we talk about this identity thing, because everybody has an altar, right? It's not just where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The problem is that your life follows your heart. So your heart is mobile. It's going to go wherever you tell it to go. So where your treasure is, there you will be also. You follow your treasure. So you sacrifice for it, you cling to it, you fight for it, you can't live without it. And Jesus says, quit treasuring things that will not last. In other words, quit holding on so tightly to things that you can't take with you or things that don't define you anyway. And I think everything that Jesus is talking about in Matthew chapter 6 is related to man's relationship with stuff. But even more than that, we're talking about idols and we're talking about altars and we're talking about stewardship, really, when we dive in deeper into Matthew chapter 6.
Yeah, so you're saying it kind of goes all back to identity and what society tells you to identify with and identify as, and I think that that can
Yeah.
go for our possessions as well. If you don't mind sharing, you shared a story about Monopoly and about the box. Would you mind sharing that with us so that can kind of
Yeah.
give us an illustration?
Yeah, great story. So that comes from a book by John Ortberg and one of my favorite authors. So he tells the story of getting together every summer with his grandmother at her lake cabin. I think it was in Wisconsin. And one of the highlights of the summer is they would play Monopoly, and she would wipe the floor with him. I mean, she would take all of his money and everything that he had and would win the game handily every time they played. And so one year he left his grandmother's cabin. He went back home and he spent all year kind of perfecting his Monopoly game and getting better and better. And so when summer came around and he went to visit her, they sat down to play Monopoly, and he actually did to her what she had done to him so often. He wiped the floor with her. I mean, he beat her handily. And at the end of the game, his grandmother said, so here is one of the biggest rules concerning Monopoly. And she folded up the board and put all of the other hotels and little plastic pieces back in the box. And she said, it all goes back in the box. And that's life, isn't it? It all goes back in the box. All of us are going to do time in a box, for instance, I guess so to speak. But at the end of the day, all goes back in the box. You hear people say, well, a millionaire, they'll say he died a millionaire. He didn't die a millionaire. He died penniless. You've never seen a hearse with a luggage rack. You can't take this stuff with you. And so it gets left to somebody else and probably gets sold at a yard sale or an estate sale, but it's going to get left to somebody else who probably doesn't treasure it and value it as much as you did. You worked so hard for it and you clung so tightly to it, and yet it all goes back in the box.
Yeah, I thought that that was a powerful illustration. So, in ministry, you probably see this playing out with different people and with different things. So, in what ways do you see this lie play out in the lives of Christians, especially young adult Christians?
Well, one of the things that I see often, and I don't want to derail the conversation and go down a different path, not trying to exit off the interstate right now, but I see it often with sports. My child has got to be better than this child. And so there's this competition, and you pay for the lessons, you pay for them to be on a travel team, and you pay all that money to go all these different places because we kind of drink the Kool-Aid. We feel like, in order for my kid to be the best, I've got to pour all this money and all these resources into him or her, and therefore they'll get to the top, they'll get that Division I scholarship and all that. And that may be true. That may be the end game for some of these kids. But what it does is it pushes God to the back burner because now I've invested everything in my child and into their athletic prowess, right? But you also see it in other things, possessions, buying the newest, latest bit of technology or, you know, car or having the biggest house on the block or whatever. It kind of seeps in. It's not always so overt. Sometimes it's subtle and you find yourself trying to keep up with the Joneses, even though you wouldn't exactly define it that way. And again, you're getting back to identity. So, is your child defined by their athletic prowess? Well, no, you would say that, right? But every indication is that they are based on what you're pouring into them. Same way with houses and cars and money and all that. Your checkbook will tell you what you value most. It doesn't lie. So you look at your checkbook, you look at your bank statement, and it'll tell you, are you serving an idol and what that idol is. And oftentimes it's money and what money can buy, right? And again, it's coming around to this idea that none of this is going to go with me when I pass. I think one of the reasons we don't think eternally or long haul when it comes to this kind of stuff is because we kind of do our best to create heaven right here on earth. And so if we create it here and everything's convenient and comfortable here, then why do I need to look towards something else, something that's even better? I can't imagine anything better than what I have right here. And so we become people who are defined by what we have rather than who we are. I keep going back to that, but that's really what happens. And again, the problem with idolatry is that it's often vague, and many of the things we idolize are good things. money's not a bad thing. Money's neutral. That's just paper and coin and credit cards. I mean, money's just neutral. It's our relationship to it that causes the problem. And a lot of times the idol that we worship is our children or our marriage. Well, you can't do like the Old Testament to those idols and pulverize them and turn them into powder and drink them. I mean, that would be awful, right? But you do have to let them assume the proper place in your life and understanding that the blessings can never override the blesser. I think that's the moral of the story with Abraham and Isaac. I think God was teaching that lesson. Does the blessing, which in this case was Isaac, override the blesser? Do you love me more than you love the blessing? And if so, prove it, right?
Yeah, I was teaching on, the passage right after that in class last night. And I almost wonder, about do not worry. And I almost wonder, is it difficult for us to even practice this, to practice trusting in God and seeking his kingdom first and realizing that God is going to take care of us? Because to be honest, we're able to get everything we want. Everything is just
Yep.
given to us.
Yeah.
If we're hungry, back in that time, they were genuinely concerned about where their next meal was coming from. They had one piece of clothing, or I guess two, garment and cloak. And so they were genuinely concerned about these things. We're not. We can just go Academy and buy a new t-shirt. We can just go to McDonald's and get a cheeseburger. I think another thing that our possessions and this idol of possessions can do is it forces us to not really have to trust in God. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. We over worry about our over loves.
Mm.
So you're gonna over worry about the things that you over love, whether that be good things or maybe things that aren't so good. Like good things would be our children, our marriage, our health. It's totally and completely reasonable to worry about those things. And, we often look at the command, do not worry, like the one that says, do not fear. We see that over and over again in scripture. And we hand it down as a command, do not worry. Well, but I am worried. Well, stop, you're sinning. Okay, well, now I'm worried about sinning and going to hell. And it's like this vicious circle, but I don't think Jesus is scolding his listeners here. I think he understands that worry is a natural part of the human existence. Obviously, God made us to experience certain emotions. I think the problem is over worrying. And I think the key in the passage that helps me and I hope helps others is when Jesus says, "Is not life more than?" Absolutely, it is. Certainly, it is. Life is more than food and clothing. And by the way, God takes care of all the little things, the lilies in the field. I mean, He takes care of them, and the sparrow. I mean, how would you not think He's going to take care of you? He's proven it. I mean, Jesus died on a cross for you. He went to the ultimate end to get you to be with him for all eternity. You not think he's going to take care of you now? But here's the problem is like you just said, it's exactly right. We don't want our daily bread. We want our retirement bread. We want our yearly bread. We want enough to live on for several years to come. And God wants dependence on him. And have to somehow, some way find contentment in what we have rather than what we don't have. And I think we tend to define contentment as in, trying to be happy when we don't have what we want. That's not contentment. Contentment is being satisfied with God. But we put so much time and energy into accruing all this stuff, it's hard for us to keep a loose grip on it. I would say it like this, Tyler. It's kind of like we come to God and we say, God, just please give me the things that I need, and even give me the things that I want, a great marriage and good kids and a great job and all that. And because God is a good God, he gives us those things and we hold on to them tightly and we're thankful for them. And one day God comes along and says, but I really want you. I want a relationship with you. Take my hand. Well, like, I can't take your hand. I've got all this stuff in my hands. And he's like, well, put that stuff down and take my hand. And you're like, I don't think I want to do that. I mean, it becomes hard. It's the rich young ruler kind of scenario, right? And so, in order to take his hand, you've got to put some of this stuff down. And that's where the rub comes in. Do I love the blessing more than I love the one who gave me that blessing?
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. So I want to kind of I want to ask you about social media. It's such a big part of our lives. And I couldn't help but think about this question when it comes to this lie of I am what I have. What role do you think social media plays in feeding ourselves this lie?
Yeah. Well, there used to be a time, Tyler, when you would go to the Rocky Mountains and you would pull off on the side of the road and you would take a picture with your camera of the mountains and the snow cap and just the beauty of God's creation. And you'd go to the ocean, you'd stand on the beach and you'd take a picture with your camera of the sun setting on the water. And now we stop at the Rocky Mountains or at the beach, and our first thought, I need to take a picture of me, right? And so I'll have the Rocky Mountains in the background. I'll have a picture of the beach in the background. We even have a stick that we put our phone at the end of, and we get our friends in there and we take a picture and then we post it on social media. And then we check it constantly to see how many likes and how many reposts that we get. And then we put filters on it, right? Because we live in selfie mode. And that's just how we operate now. Everything is about selfie. It's about self. It's about how I can promote myself on social media. The problem is that oftentimes the image we present on social media isn't who we are anyway. It's a fabrication of who we are, whether it be filters or just the life that we want people to think that we are living. There's this new app, and I'm on it, so I can't complain. It's called Be Real, and I keep thinking, ain't nobody real on this thing. I mean, this is, you can call it Be Real, but I don't know that there's any reality to it, right? Probably on Instagram either, or any of the social media outlets. But it's all about presenting an image or a persona that people will like, that they will grab onto. TikTok is another one. How many followers can I get so that I can economize this, so that I can make some money? And who would have ever thought that a person lip syncing some songs could get thousands upon thousands of followers and make millions of dollars and monetize this kind of thing? But that's what we've come to. And so, all that to say, social media has a big bearing on this, because that's now the marketplace. Jesus went to where the most people were, and in his day and time, it was the marketplace. And now for us, the marketplace is social media, billions of people on social media. And so if you want to gather a following, if you want to get an audience, if you want to get people to buy into what you're trying to sell image wise, well, you do it on social media. And you've always got to keep upping the ante, right? If you want to keep getting likes and follows and all that kind of stuff, which I believe if we want to truly, make the world a better place, use social media sparingly, and get into the world and do some good, right? Do some things that are productive.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned upping the ante and always trying for the next big thing. And I think that that's what social media does, is because we live in a very fast-paced, fast-trending world. What was trendy, a week or 2 weeks ago isn't trendy now. And so you've
Right.
got to get the next new thing. You've got to get the next new outlet or whatever that is. And I think the other problem that can come up with that is you start comparing yourself to other people, and you start saying, well, if they've got it, or if this influencer has this new thing, well, then that means I've got to get it. And
Yeah.
then we keep acquiring and keep getting all these new things, and then ultimately it's never enough. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. That isn't going to fulfill you the way that God will. And it also cannot become our identity, especially as Christians. The world's going to do that, right? We can just expect that. That's just going
Hmm.
to happen. But as Christians, that's one way that we can draw the line, kind of like what you're talking about, and use social media to glorify God, and also use it in moderation and kind of watch the time that we're spending on it too, so that we don't fall into those traps like you were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, we're so off base on this, me included. There's nothing wrong with having things. There's nothing wrong with preparing for retirement. There's nothing wrong with, saving some money for a rainy day and even having possessions. But if you look at scripture, wealth was always a subordinate good. That's what the Bible teaches. You accrue wealth so that you can help others. And I'm not sure many of us realize what the Bible's teaching is concerning that. Where for us, me included, many times wealth is about promoting me. It's about how I can, take care of my family, how I can take care of my kids. Again, nothing wrong with that. But so often we lose sight of the goal. And when you look in scripture, wealth was always a subordinate good. Money was never meant to improve your status, it was always meant to help somebody else who was at a lower status, right? That's the first church, pooling all their resources so that no one had a need. And I know it's a different time. I know that we have more money than we probably know what to do with, at least many of us, most of us. But at the same time, getting back to this idea that money doesn't identify who I am. Money is just a resource to help others. And if we could ever come around to that, I think it would probably put it in a proper perspective and how we spend it on other things.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned contentment earlier. How does discontentment factor into telling ourselves this lie of "I am what I have"?
Well, we live in a competition based society, right? Everything's a competition. I compete at work, I compete at school, I compete for a parking place closer to the front of Walmart. Everything is a competition. Second place is the first loser. It's all about looking out for number one. And so when everything is a competition, then how do you define winning? Well, in our culture, winning is having the best seat, the most stuff, the best of everything, right? And so that's often how we define winning. But it may not be having the best stuff necessarily. It may just be having better stuff than the next person. This comparisonitis that you talked about, I call it the disease of affluenza, where I've got to accrue as much stuff to be as affluent so that it shows my value and my worth. And that's what we tend to define ourselves by, is how many commas I have in my bank account. And unfortunately, that builds on itself. Like we talked about a while ago, you're always upping the ante. The problem with bigger and better and newer is that it never delivers. And there's always something bigger, better, and newer. You can get the new iPhone tomorrow, but there'll be a new one coming out in 6 months to a year, right? You can get a new car, a 2025, whatever. And by 2026, a lot of the things on it will be obsolete, or they've been improved on so much. So you can never get ahead of the curve. You can never feel like, okay, I can relax and I can say, I'm there. It will never happen. You're chasing something that's elusive. And I think Solomon had a lot to say about that in Ecclesiastes. So when we talk about discontent, chasing contentment will always bring discontent. Always, because you will never be able to sit back and say, I've made it. I'm completely satisfied. I have everything. I'm good. That just doesn't happen, because what you're chasing is guaranteed to always leave you dissatisfied. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And something else that I've noticed in my own life is that sometimes other people can play a huge role in our discontentment. And I'm not just talking about, seeing other people's posts on social media. I'm talking about when you have a conversation with someone, at a get together or whatever, even in church. And, the conversation can just get to going, and you're looking at, your old 2010, 2009 car or whatever, and they pull up with their new 2024, 2025 car. They're talking all about it, and they're saying, hey, when are you going to upgrade your car? When are you going to
Yeah.
upgrade your phone? And so even if you're content in the moment, you may go home thinking, well, should I get a new car? Should I get a new phone? Is this what I should do? And so I think we as the church can kind of aid each other in that in some strange way. Does that make sense?
It does. I was in Nashville Saturday. We live close to Nashville, so we were down there at Target, which is a must stop for my children, my wife, and we're in there. And I was pushing the baby around in the stroller while everybody else was. For those who don't know, I just had a grandbaby. She's 2 months old, and so her name is AJ, and I had AJ in the stroller, and I was pushing her around, and Keely and Libby, my wife and daughter, were shopping, and so I'm trying to keep AJ happy, because as long as she's moving, she's good. And I hear a teen girl, probably no more than 13, talking to what I believe to be her grandmother. And she said, why are we looking for shoes at Target? The shoes I want are name brand, and they're like $200. I'm like, wow, okay, just put it out there. Target's shoes are not good enough because they're not as expensive. They're not name brand. So therefore, we need to go find some shoes. Why are we wasting our time here, right? And it's just a snippet, a sample size of what we see so often in our world. And again, social media doesn't help that because there's ad after ad, there's influencer after influencer. I mean, we have videos, Tyler, on YouTube that get millions of views of opening a box, like of the latest Apple Watch or whatever it is. We're going to do an unboxing. And it's like, really? Like people watch this? They just watch them open it up and then put it on. And I'm like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. But that's what we have now because it's all about stuff and man's relationship to stuff. And the more stuff you have, the more prominent you must be, the more value you must have, and therefore the more you contribute, which is completely off base, but that's where we're at.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've worn Target shoes, so I guess that I'm
Absolutely.
not name brand, I'm just not not good enough. No. So I want to switch the conversation on, things that we can kind of take home from this. A couple more questions. How we've talked about kind of the danger of making possessions our identity as Christians. So with that, how should we as Christians view our possessions in light of how Jesus calls us to live?
Yeah, I think we can enjoy them, just not worship them. And that kind of brings the conversation back to where we started. Don't let your possessions possess you. Keep a loose grip on them, understanding that they have their place. I always say, let the main thing be the main thing. I mean, that's what it is. The main thing is to let the main thing be the main thing. Why do you think the ancients worshipped the gods of agriculture or the god of the sea or the god of the harvest or war or whatever? I mean, they worship these gods because having a good crop or winning in battle, those were the biggest things in their heart. And they believed that a good crop or victory or whatever would fulfill their deepest longing. But this hole that you have that you're trying to fill is a God shaped hole. And that's the only thing that's going to fit in there. And so instead of pursuing the things that you think are going to make you happy, pursue the one thing that will bring you something greater than happiness, and that is joy. Happiness is based on current conditions and circumstances and mood and all that. You can be happy one moment and, unhappy the next because of the finicky nature of it. But the Bible teaches us to pursue something deeper, and that is joy. And joy only comes in a relationship with God because joy is about being carried away to something that is bigger than you. I liken it to when my children were born. In that moment, it wasn't about me, it was about something bigger than me. And when my first child was born, all I could think about is, I've never seen you before, but I'm so in love with you. And I'm going to do everything from this point forward to make sure that you are healthy, that you are well taken care of, and that you grow into a wonderful, productive adult. And so when you get carried away to the point that it's no longer about you, then that's joy. And we see people in the Bible who experience joy even in the midst of persecution because it was about something bigger. And so quit trying to use the things of this world to fill a hole that only God can fill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can get into this mindset and we can kind of start using these things to fill that hole, and we can do it without even noticing it. And I think that's kind of the danger of it too.
Yeah. Well, and we all have a priority list, right? I mean, when I was coaching, it was faith, family, football, right, or whatever the sport was, and we all have a priority list. If you were to ask the average person, especially the average Christian, what's your priority list? They would say something like that. I mean, God first, then my spouse, my children, my career, whatever it is. Even if you don't live by that, that's what you're going to say because that's the best answer. I would suggest that everyone's priority list needs to change to where number one is God, and number two is there is no number two. That's your list. One, God, and let Him saturate everything else that you are and everything else that you do. It's interesting that when God said that I am the Lord your God, you are to have no other gods before me. we read that and we tend to think, well, there were many gods in the ancient world. God is saying, I outrank them all. You put me first and make sure that I'm your top priority. But really, if you look at the original language, what God was saying is, with no other gods before me, what he meant was, no other gods before my face. Uh, I don't want to be one God on your list among many, and I outrank them all. I'm the only one. There's no other God before me in front of my face. I don't want to see them. They don't need to be in my periphery. They don't need to be anywhere around me because they hold no value. I'm the only one that can take care of you. And I think that's how we often look at it as well. Yes, I probably pay too much attention to money and possessions. I probably hang on to a little too closely, but I got God first. And God saying, no, it's not about me outranking everything else. It's about me being the only one on your list.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, I knew that I was going to be busy for the next few months after that because I was pursuing a position, and I remember calling my brother and just asking like, how do I keep God first? How do I keep Him above all these things? And he kind of said something, similar to what you said. He was like, no, 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 you're looking at it the wrong way. God just encompasses everything that we do.
Yeah.
It's, you're you're going to this place and, you're with God. You're in the presence of God. You're praying. You're doing these things. You're keeping God in mind as you go throughout your life. We're not suggesting, quit your job, go be a monk, whatever. But it's as you go throughout your life, you're realizing that these things ultimately, these external things don't matter, okay, near as much as God, and they're not going to fulfill you near as much as God. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, you love others best when you love God the most.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about an idol that maybe is our children, I hear people say, well, I just worship the ground, that they walk on, or it's all about my kids right now, or it's all about my wife, or all about my husband. You love others best when you love God the most. And that's why I say in premarital counseling, make sure you find a husband or a wife that loves God more than you, because that's always going to lead to a more successful outcome. When God comes first, nobody else suffers. Um, I've never had, in doing postmarital counseling, I've never had a husband or a wife come into my office and sit down and say, I just wish they didn't love God so much. You know, um, I think our marriage would be better if they didn't love God so much. I never hear that. In fact, 99.9% of the problems can be related back to the fact that they haven't been putting God first. So no one suffers when you love God the most.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question, what are some things we can do to avoid letting this lie affect our identity as Christians?
Yeah, the easy answer is, the answer we always give is go to church more, read your Bible more, pray more, and that kind of thing. But, the problem is we try to fix things that are spiritually related with willpower and just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Just try harder. But your won't power is always stronger than your willpower. So that doesn't work. It's about taking bad habits and replacing them with better habits. It's not just about removing behavior, it's about replacing that behavior with something better. And so, for instance, with me, some practical things that I tried to do instead of looking and scrolling through social media constantly, I've been reading more. And the books that I'm reading are, right now I'm reading God Has a Name by John Mark Comer. I try to read books that are going to enhance my spiritual life, not just fiction or nonfiction or things like that. I'm trying to read books that are going to cause me to think and that will help me to develop and grow as a Christian. Obviously, prayer time is something that is valuable to me. Even contemplative prayer, which I'm dabbling in, I'm trying to figure out contemplative prayer in that you're sitting and you're considering your blessings, considering what God has done for you, not just reciting something or praying something, but thinking and trying to connect with God. There's a great book, and for the life of me, I can't remember now which one it was. It may be Practicing the Way, but in that book, it talks about just sitting still. And he says, me looking at God, God looking at me, and we're happy. I love that thought. Just sitting still. My place is on my front porch on my rocking chair. And I just sit there and think about me looking at God, God looking at me, and we're good. we're happy. Trying to connect God with God on a deeper level and trying to not allow anything to crowd that out, especially the things that I tend to value more, meaning possessions, but also even, family, children. How can I include them in this approach? That would be better, right? That instead of idolizing them, I put God first and I bring them into the equation and I say, hey, we're going to have, Devo night, or we're going to watch a movie together, or we're going to do something that enhances all of us spiritually instead of me trying to do it over here and then come back and work it on you. Let's do it together, right? I think declaring a fast, I think fasting should be a part of our spiritual disciplines still. Jesus said, when you fast, I think he expected us to continue to fast, but not just fasting with food. How about declaring a fast from social media, from television, and using that time to connect to him on a deeper level? I just feel like whatever it is you do that is pursuing God and that relationship first is always going to have a positive impact on these other things in your life. I mean, if an idol is first, how do you get it out of first place? That's the key. And it may be different for everyone, but finding some way, somehow, to take it out of first place and take God off the back burner and put him on the front one.
Yeah, it all goes back to replacing whatever that idol is or that possession is with God. And I love this
Hmm.
idea of fasting. And you mentioned not only fasting from food, but fasting from other things. That helps us practice this idea of would you be okay without your possessions, without your things? So if you went, say, 3 days a week without social media, okay, would you be okay with that? Like, would you be okay with not being able to, present this image out to the world of who you are? If you went on a vacation and no one knew about it because you didn't post about it on social media, would you be okay with it? I think about that verse in Colossians 3 about letting the peace of God rule your heart. It is just kind of like if you were just sitting there, like you were saying, on your porch, wherever it is, and just enjoying God's presence, would you be okay with that? And I think that that's a question. I like challenging questions like that. I don't know if other people do, but just asking ourselves those questions can really challenge us and grow our faith and make us think, okay, is God enough for me, or do I have to have these things to fulfill me?
That's it. Is God enough at the end of the day? Tyler, I don't want to harp on this too much because I don't want to bring attention to it. But in January, I went to the doctor, um, ended up finding out I had cancer and had surgery in May, and the margins weren't clear. So now I have to go back every 3 months and just pray that the cancer is not returned or that it's not spread across my body somewhere else. And of course, every time you have a little pain or ache or something, you're like, oh, well, is it back? Is it somewhere else now? That's a lot to live with. That's a lot to process. But through it all, I've had this peace. But I can tell you from that, you don't tend to care as much about the things you used to care about so much, right? Having the latest, greatest thing is not as much of a priority for me any longer. You think about, well, I probably need some new shoes or whatever. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be here, you know? And I didn't know that before either, but it just brings it into perspective. I heard a coach the other day say one of his players that was injured is day to day. Aren't we all? Aren't we all day to day, moment by moment, really? So from the time I was diagnosed and even up to this day, when I sit on the front porch in my rocking chair and I pray, always pray that the cancer stays away, that the results continue to be good. But I always say, no matter what, it's you and me, God, no matter what. And because I feel like I'm in a win win situation. Whatever happens, it's going to be okay. Would I love to be here longer, preach longer, get to watch my grandchild grow up? Absolutely. And there's nothing right now that indicates that that's not going to happen, right? But it's a daily proposition now. My dependency on God has greatly increased. Every 3 months, I have to go and see, and I go at the end of this month again, and you get a little worked up about it. You pray about it, and you just hope and pray that it's not back. But at the end of the day, it's you and me, no matter what. And is He enough? Yeah, Yeah, right now for me, he is enough. And all these other things that I seem to be so concerned about really don't seem to be so concerning.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and um, what a what a crazy thing to just live with, and
Mhm.
that thought of not knowing the future. It's like the quote, not, we don't know who holds the future. We do know who holds the future. We don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. There we go. But yeah, and that's powerful. And things that we take for granted, like our health and our possessions. So I appreciate you bringing
Yeah.
that up. Uh, that's a great place to end the conversation. Thank you, Chris, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was great. I appreciate what you do, and man, keep doing it.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to another episode of Road Trips Navigating Life with Jesus. This podcast is in partnership with Ministry League. You can download their app or check out their social media pages or YouTube channel to find all the great resources they have to offer. We'll be back next week with another episode of Road Trips.